So I wanted to discuss a very controversial subject here in the dirty South states. And when I say this, I'm referring to Arkansas, northern Louisiana, eastern Texas, Mississippi. I want to talk about how a lot of people say that once a spike, always a spike. That is nonsense, okay? If you're in a big buck management, big buck ranch area where, you know, bucks are bred to specifically have 8-point, 10-point, maybe even a 12-point mainframe when they're a year and a half. Okay, if it's a spike, maybe at best it has not had the ability to achieve its potential. So a lot of those big game ranches, if it's a spike, they kill it. And you know, I understand, because they've got a lot of money invested in these deer to grow the biggest absolute monster racks possible. And if it's a year and a half old deer and they've got a lot of money in it, they expect it to have more than a spike. However, for the common hunter, myself, possibly you, a spike is just a year and a half old deer, if not a 6-month-old deer. Hunters come out constantly in my area, and they claim once a spike, always a spike, because they have heard of the big breeder whitetail deer management areas that are producing, you know, huge bucks at year and a half old deer. These deer that are, you know, not behind a high fence, the deer that are in the 100% wild, free range deer, if they're a year and a half old deer, and if they're a spike, a lot of times they are just a year and a half old deer. Now, a lot of the hunters that claim once a spike, always a spike, they come out giving the description of, and again, this is very controversial. A lot of people completely disagree with me, and that's okay. We can agree to disagree, and we can be very nice about it. However, a lot of people come out describing a 200-pound spike with pedestals, you know, $half size, maybe the size of Coke cans. And they explain that he's got described antler, you know, spikes this long with huge bases and a 200+ pound spike. However, in all of my experience of whitetail hunting in all the years, and I grew up whitetail hunting, I mean, from the early age of just a toddler, I watched my dad, my grandpa, and all my uncles kill deer. I have yet to ever see, I'm describing the scenario before I was even old enough to hunt. I have yet to see a 200-pound spike. A lot of hunters are just using that excuse as, well, we need to cull those deer because they're just spikes. I have yet to see one skinning rack that weighs 200 pounds. And in this area, in the dirty South, the southern states, like I said, eastern Texas, northern Louisiana, southern Arkansas, Mississippi, a 200-pound deer is a huge deer, especially if it's not on the edge of some kind of agriculture. If that deer, if a spike weighs 150 pounds, that is an extremely large bodied deer. And I completely believe that that deer has not had a chance to achieve his potential. You know, deer grow their body before their body size grows before their antler development does. You know, their antler development is what their body is not you know, achieve. And if you look at the scenario, you can have kids in a 6th grade class. You'll have some boys that may weigh 70 pounds. You may have others that are busting 140. It just depends on the what habitat, what nutrients they're getting. However, whenever a deer is a spike, don't rule that deer out as one that doesn't have any future potential. One that is a 200-pound spike I have yet to see, and I fully believe that if there was such thing as a 200-pound spike in these southern states, that that's probably a deer that's on his way down, and I mean, he's on extreme way down. If he's that large a body of a buck and doesn't have any horns to go along with it, you know, that deer just hasn't had a chance for the most part. You know, if he's that big, maybe he's a buck on the way down. However, again, I have never experienced that. So a lot of people want to kill a spike, and they say it's once a spike, always a spike. That's the go-to saying on deer. If it's a spike, a lot of times, if it's a spike, once it's a spike, it's always a spike. That's absolutely, in my opinion, and my opinion may be different than yours, it's absolutely false. That deer the next year could be a substantial 8-point. He could be even bigger than that. He may not have had the nutrients he needs to develop his antlers after his body has grown. So a deer is not going to achieve his full antler. He's not even going to begin to achieve his full antler growth until after his body has reached a certain point. So the saying, once a spike, always a spike, in my opinion, and again, that could be completely different than yours. I'm just trying to share what knowledge I know. Once a spike, always a spike is completely fictitious, and typically it's a young deer. It's a 1.5-year-old deer. Bless its heart, if it is a 2.5-year-old deer, that means there are a lot of deer in your area, and that deer may not have been able to get the nutrition that it needs to fully develop its body, let alone its horns. A lot of people want to claim that, but a lot of people are looking for an excuse to kill a deer. A lot of times they'll come out and they'll say, well, it's a cull because it was a spike. It's never going to be more than a spike. I disagree with that. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. Typically a spike is just a young deer. You know, a 200-pound spike with pedestals that big around is one that I've heard described thousands of times by deer hunters, and in my area, and we now have a 3-point rule, and I'm so glad we do, because those 1.5-year-old spikes are now protected. Thank goodness. They really need another year to achieve any kind of antler development. Again, from what I've seen, I've never seen what is described as once a spike, always a spike. The 200-pound Coke can bases of a spike, I've never seen one fit that description. And if I did, I would really question whether, you know, maybe it was a real true cull. But I would highly question, you know, if that was an older deer that was on its way down, or what the problem was. I have never in my life experienced one that was always going to be a spike. Again, I'm hunting free range deer here. We're not in a agricultural area where soybeans are planted heavily or any kind of agriculture is planted heavily. So a deer of that nature may be just reaching his full potential. He may be 99% of what he eats is going towards his body development. That's a very, very likely scenario. Just because it's a spike, though, does not mean it's always going to be a spike. The next year, at 2.5 years old, he may go above and beyond what you would typically expect a spike to do. He just needs a chance.